Alfred Rosenberg was one of Adolf Hitler's closest confidants and the chief architect of Nazi ideology. As one of the principal thinkers behind the Third Reich's genocidal policies, Rosenberg's writings laid the foundation for Nazi racial theories, which ultimately led to the Holocaust. He was also the mastermind behind the systematic looting and confiscation of cultural treasures across occupied Europe during World War II. Rosenberg was obsessed with the notion of Aryan superiority. His 1930 book, The Myth of the 20th Century, outlined his twisted vision of a pure Germanic race that was destined to dominate the world. His pseudo-intellectual ideas became a driving force behind Nazi racial policies, and his influence over Hitler was immense. He eventually became the head of the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, an organization that orchestrated the theft of countless priceless works of art, religious artifacts, and cultural treasures from Jewish families and occupied territories. But Rosenberg was not just an ideologue, he was an active participant in the looting and plundering of Europe, overseeing the confiscation of cultural heritage on an unimaginable scale. As the Nazi regime fell apart, so too did Rosenberg's carefully constructed world of racial superiority and pillaged wealth. His crimes would not go unpunished, and his role as the intellectual face of Nazi ideology would lead him straight to the gallows. Rosenberg's primary goal was to advance and enforce his vision of an Aryan-dominated world, devoid of Jews, Slavs, and anyone he considered racially inferior. As Hitler's trusted philosophical advisor, Rosenberg envisioned a global order ruled by a racially pure elite, a dream he believed could only be realized by purging the world of undesirable elements. He wanted nothing less than a complete cultural and racial reformation based on Nazi ideals. But his ambitions extended beyond ideology. Rosenberg saw himself as the custodian of a new cultural order. Through the ERR, he sought to build a vast Nazi-controlled empire of art and knowledge, plundering museums, libraries, and private collections from France, the Soviet Union, and elsewhere. His ultimate goal was to create a grand museum filled with these treasures, symbolizing the superiority of the Aryan race. Rosenberg not only wanted to cleanse Europe of Jews and other undesirables, but he also desired to erase their cultural legacies by seizing their greatest works of art. His looting was an act of cultural genocide, intended to erase the presence of those he deemed inferior from history itself. Rosenberg's grand vision was doomed by the same forces that destroyed the Nazi regime. As the tide of World War II turned against Germany, the Nazi dream of world domination crumbled. Allied forces began to reclaim territories and liberate concentration camps, exposing the full horror of the Nazi crimes Rosenberg had helped conceive. The looted treasures, stolen from Jewish families and occupied nations, were discovered in hidden repositories across Europe. Rosenberg's plan to create a lasting Aryan cultural legacy was thwarted as Allied forces pursued justice. The art and cultural objects he had looted were gradually returned to their rightful owners, and his reputation as the Nazi philosopher of plunder was forever stained by the atrocities committed under his watch. But Rosenberg's inability to achieve his goals ran deeper than military defeat. His twisted racial ideology, which had fueled his ambition, was built on lies and hatred, destined to fail from the start. His obsession with racial purity and his disdain for other cultures blinded him to the reality of human diversity and strength, leading him to believe that brute force and plunder could reshape the world. As the war turned against Germany and the Nazi regime began to collapse, Rosenberg remained defiant. Even in the face of certain defeat, he clung to his racist ideology and refused to admit any wrongdoing. His unwavering loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause prevented him from recognizing the gravity of his crimes. Instead of attempting to flee or atone for his actions, Rosenberg stayed in Germany, confident that his philosophical contributions would ensure his place in history. However, Rosenberg's arrogance and refusal to confront the reality of the situation led to his downfall. He was captured by Allied forces in May 1945 and brought to trial at the Nuremberg military tribunals. Unlike some other Nazi officials who tried to distance themselves from Hitler or claim ignorance of the Holocaust, Rosenberg remained unapologetic, still clinging to his warped beliefs. During the Nuremberg trials, Rosenberg faced charges of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from his role in the Holocaust to the systematic looting of Europe's cultural treasures. His attempts to defend his actions were met with scorn, and the world saw him for what he truly was, a fanatical ideologue responsible for countless atrocities. Rosenberg's arrogance and refusal to renounce his Nazi ideology only sealed his fate. The Nuremberg trials were not merely about holding individuals accountable. They were about exposing the full extent of Nazi crimes and ensuring that justice was served for the millions of victims. Rosenberg's defense, rooted in his racist philosophies, failed to sway the court. His unwavering belief in Nazi ideology was seen as proof of his complicity in the regime's horrors, rather than as a justification for his actions. Rosenberg's central role in crafting the ideological framework for the Holocaust and his leadership of the ERR meant that he bore significant responsibility for the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. His involvement in the plundering of Jewish property, combined with his vocal support for the extermination of Jews and other inferior races, left no doubt as to his guilt. By the time the Nuremberg trials reached their conclusion, Rosenberg was a broken man. His philosophical ideals had been discredited, his ambitions destroyed, and his legacy forever tarnished by the bloodshed he had helped unleash. Despite his defiance, Rosenberg could not escape the judgment of history. On October 16, 1946, Alfred Rosenberg was publicly executed by hanging after being found guilty on all counts at the Nuremberg trials. His execution, alongside other high-ranking Nazi officials, marked the culmination of the Allies' efforts to bring justice to those responsible for the Holocaust and the war. Rosenberg's execution was not simply a punishment for his crimes, it was a symbolic end to the dangerous ideologies he had championed. As he faced the gallows, the world witnessed the fall of one of the key architects of the Nazi nightmare. His death was a moment of reckoning for the millions of victims who had suffered under his twisted vision of racial purity. The looted treasures he had stolen were returned to their rightful owners where possible, and the ERR, the organization he had led with pride, was exposed for its role in cultural genocide. The art, manuscripts, and religious artifacts that Rosenberg had plundered in his quest to erase non-Aryan cultures were instead preserved as a testament to the resilience of those he had sought to destroy. Rosenberg's public execution marked the end of his dark legacy, but it did not erase the suffering he had caused. The atrocities he helped orchestrate continue to haunt the world, serving as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked hatred and fanaticism. In the end, Alfred Rosenberg's dreams of Aryan dominance collapsed under the weight of their own evil, leaving behind only a legacy of destruction and death. Rosenberg's execution serves as a powerful reminder that ideas, especially those rooted in hatred, can have devastating consequences. His role in crafting Nazi ideology and overseeing the looting of Europe's cultural treasures will forever be remembered as a central part of the Holocaust's machinery. Though his life ended on the gallows, the crimes he committed remain etched in history as a warning of the horrors that can arise from extremism.